Hi, I'm Greg Schaefer, and welcome to the virtual CISO moment. Denny Wan joins us today. He is the chair of the Reasonable Security Institute, the chair of the Fair Cam Working Group or Work Group, principal consultant at Security Express, and infrastructure architect at Cab Fair Technologies. Denny, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for the opportunity, Greg. I'm a long-time listener, first-time guest on your
Well,
podcast.
that's awesome. I can't believe it's taken this long to get you on. So appreciate the support and really looking forward to hearing your story and getting into some really good conversation. So why don't we start with that? How and why did you get into cyber, and talk about your path to where it got you to today?
Right, excellent. Yeah, well, my career is pretty simple. I started out working for the first biggest dinosaur in the industry. Some of your listeners might remember company called DEC or Digital or Rexis or PDV11. Don't
Hmm.
say too loud because they're dating you. You will remember what PDV11, I remember at university, we were doing punch cards.
Yes.
You're nodding. Okay, all right, so tell you in the same ballpark. Fast forward, so I started my career working for support as a technical support role for Mac Unix operating system. So I get a good understanding of the software architecture side, for a better word. And I had a fortunate opportunity, or unfortunate, some might describe, working on the second biggest dinosaur, IBM. It's just before the Sydney Olympic 2000, and they have a role opening for IT audit. I had no idea what IT audit was because I was an engineer at the operating system support network infrastructure.
Hmm.
And but I thought couldn't do any harm for me to have the second two dinosaurs on my CV, so the rest of history. And that was a fascinating introduction of cyber security risk, which has nothing to do by and large with security. And in fact, probably the jokes goes that usually engineers and my training is electrical engineer by
Hmm.
qualification are now not allowed to carry a screwdriver in a pocket when you walk around the plant because you'll get upset. Is why are you, turning the dials and poking at things. And
Right.
as an engineer, our role is to communicate and explain to people, hopefully, what we might call enduring principles. And so I learned that security is a risk management concept. And of course, back those days, compliance was the thing. But increasingly, people are asking, is the ethic proportionate? And going forward, and I started as my own consultancy practice. You mentioned Security Express back in 2006, after I served a few years with Checkpoint Software as a security architect and getting to understand enterprise at scale and network security design, implementation, and operation challenges. And all of those have less to do with technology, mostly to do with people, particularly with policy and checkpoint string, of course, um, is have a very clear understanding of your policy expression. And but I noticed that there is still a gap between insights as a auditor to processing business decisions. So I was fortunately come across the FAIR framework in 2018
Hmm.
and an opportunity to establish the senior chapter of the FAIR Institute to bring together people in the community, really think about how to communicate cyber risk, not as a technology, but a human conversation. And fast forward, the last, my most recent activity mentioned is I also have fortunate opportunity to chair the FairCam work group. FairCam, simply put, is to measure the effectiveness of a control using the FAIR principles, and I then consume that insight into finally the narrative of reasonable security, and I've uh, labeled that as a consensus between stakeholders. So not just a technology view, but really speak to the balance between the cost and the business benefits.
Well, I'm a big fan of FAIR, and I know we'll dig into it in just a short bit here. Certainly, it has so much value to be able to show just that, to show the value of
Mm,
controls, value of
mm,
implementation of it can help to solve the question of like, well, do I need to spend $10,000 on this new control?
mm,
Is it going to is the cost exposure less or more than the cost of the control. So,
mm,
looking forward to talking a little more about that, and also looking forward to asking you what you think is one of the most significant threats to small and mid-sized businesses cybersecurity. I suspect it
mm,
probably has something to do with risk quantification, but that
mm.
might just be me. I don't know. But we'll talk about that in just a moment. Are you a virtual CISO or interested in the space? Then join us at the Virtual CISO Exchange LinkedIn group. Now, small and mid-sized businesses often need executive level information security experience, but can't afford a full-time CISO. The virtual CISO is one way to address that gap. And this group is for current and interested vCISOs to discuss issues and challenges both generally in information security and those specific to the vCISO space. Go ahead and search for it on LinkedIn. And if you're interested in that group, like I just said beforehand, just look for it on LinkedIn. It is now becoming a public group. So as of July 21st, you'll be able to join without having to apply for it. So, Denny, now let's talk a little bit about small and mid-sized businesses cybersecurity. I've given you a little bit of time with the ad there to think about what your answer is. What is one of the more significant threats to cybersecurity for small and mid-sized businesses?
I think this universal answer in any country is ignorance, and that's not in derogative sense. But when you are a small business like owner like ourselves, you have a lot of ball to juggle. You got to pay your bills. There is not a paycheck waiting for you at end of the week. So security, while it's important, is probably not front of mind, and that's why I come up with uh, the consultant model or more label or not nothing more than that of what's reasonable security because um, as business owner we have to make decisions and it's one thing to satisfy yourself you done the best things but your family and everyone else depends on that too particularly your shareholders so in addition to satisfy yourself you probably would want to be able to explain the reasonableness of your business decision. And last point I want to draw attention to that is, of course, 95% of the Australian economy are small and medium businesses.
Hmm.
So this is very pertinent uh, 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 constraint that I'm familiar with in every day. And of course, your business, vCISO is exactly the perfect format for helping those businesses because most of them do not even have an IT manager level CISO. So hopefully they don't have a virtual IT manager do better than that. But certainly vCISO is the best consumable format. So of course I'm preaching to the converted here.
Well, I appreciate the plug there too for the industry, of course. Would like to pivot a little bit though. I'm fascinated to hear a little bit more about the FAIR cam. I'm reading a little bit about it. It's a diagnostic tool to expose the root cause of control variance and decision
Mm,
gaps. Now,
mm.
like I said beforehand, I'm familiar with FAIR, but I'm not really familiar with this group. Can you dive in a little bit more into detail as to what and how this is going to help not just small businesses but all businesses?
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah. So, as I explained earlier on, my view is security is a human conversation and often been overshadowed by the technology and the hackers into these. Uh, the reality is it is not rocket science, and where I address and help my clients is to create a balanced and deliver basic security hygiene. And there's a similar fact that I think universally most governments find that even basic security hygienes are not being practiced. No obvious example than Common Pipeline a couple of years ago, and one might be surprised. I'm still surprised. In 2020, there would be a situation where MFA protection is not enforced or critical entry point, such as VPN to critical infrastructure, you might have thought that's something that would be done without second thought. It's not as if it's a rocket science. And 30 years ago, you had to install RSA infrastructure, pretty expensive. In 2020, really, there is no excuse. So let's not dive into that, but it's easy to, in hindsight, explain why that has happened. What FairCam really addressed, you may think, is if I can position FairCam and FAIR. So FairCam stands for FAIR, which is factor analysis information risk, is a risk quantification methodology published by the Open Group since 2009. So been elected by the committee for a very long time. And Jack Jones, who is authored the FAIR framework, has always considered there's a need to extend that investigation to look at country effectiveness. So if I can put in a perspective, FAIR might explain that. For example, along pipeline, your authentication is a weak area, not your BCP backup or your malware management. All those important, but in a risk analysis process, the organization directed the team to focus to strengthening authentication. So MFA is part of that. Now the question is, particularly MFA, which MFA format is most effective? People would be prepared to use, and of course we know even today, if you use Microsoft authentication technology, you still have different level assurance, and assurance may not be a term they wouldn't necessarily understand. So let me explain that. For example, Office 365, you can elect to, you wanted to use a voice-based authentication. So Office 365 can call out to your phone, and you can say yes or no, or send you a text. And of course, the recommended integration is using biometric integration on the device. So Office 365 would initiate a authentication request to your device, and you had to confirm via biometric. Now, that choice matters, and often the perception is, well, why don't you use biometric-based authentication, until you realize that if you have, for your own team, let alone whether you have corporate issue devices, but for a third party coming into your infrastructure or an application only occasionally, the expectation demanded them to use a certain strength authentication, such as biometric. They might have policy barrier or a policy concern that they would not allow biometric authentication. So that become a business conversation.
So I know that you had mentioned before when we were talking about the risks for small and mid-sized businesses, you talked about ignorance, and not necessarily in a bad sense, just in a realistic, pragmatic sense. And certainly quantifying risk can help to reduce some of that ignorance. But I know you and I have had a little bit of discussions offline about the relationship between the CFO and the CISO, and how important that can be, and how that can actually affect risk in an organization. So how can it affect risk in an organization, and what should that communication look like?
I've done a lot of research using insurance as a lens rather than the form. So my research does not assert whether insurance, cyber insurance or business insurance is the appropriate risk mitigation tool. But the angle I take is, how does insurers measure your risk, especially cyber risk, and to the extent where they can put a premium on the table when we struggle to describe that, learn to measure that. So of course, insurers have a lot of actual modeling skill, and cyber communications are increasingly being consumed in that context to assist with that dimensioning. That is one side, that is the supply side. On the consumer side, internal organization, how do you then create a reasonable security conversation within the organization? As they often say, this all models are wrong, some are useful. So this conversation is nothing more than a model, but an important one. and so I looking at from the angle is use communication to improve those communication. So I was fortunate that you have an invitation to deliver a webinar to the CP Australia community, Chartered Professional Accounting community, who are interested to understand how communication to assist with the profession. And I proposed to them, which they accepted, that perhaps my focus is not on curating sub-risk disclosure, which is what they're tasked to do as a CFO and sign off on those public annual report and P&L, but to ensure those disclosures are defensible. And often where the barrier is the communication between the CFO who sign off and the CSO who trying to explain, CISO who trying to explain the rationale and how they come up with that quantified risk. So having a standard-based calculation process, modeling process, give confidence and simplify the communication.
I think that's so critical because that's one of the things that I think that a lot of security officers lack in as far as the skill set goes, and even just the basic understanding that they don't really need to. Their main proficiency shouldn't be in talking in technical terms. It should be in talking in business terms, because ultimately the security officer's main goal is to make sure that the CFO and the rest of the C-suite and the board of directors understand cybersecurity risks so that they can make risk-informed decisions. And certainly you touched on cyber insurance as well too. It's amazing on how that's kind of pivoted in the industry, because it used to be they just provided a company with a checklist. You check like 12 boxes and you're fine and everything. But to your point, the cyber insurers are now really, really wanting to come in and find out just how effective your company is as far as implementing controls. So do you see positive movement in this direction? I know sometimes it's difficult to get from a good idea to operationalizing it.
Absolutely. And I think my recall, just by coincidence, I drew attention about 2 months ago to a prison setting situation, I think in Canada, where an active cyber insurance policy was rescinded. The legal term is rescinded with no prejudice, means the two parties walk away with no compensation, no liability on an active cyber insurance policy. You may remember that? I think you spoke about one of your podcasts.
Yeah, that was probably about a month ago, I think. Or, no, it might have been longer than that. Now that I think about it. Yeah.
So the incident was in August last year in 2022, and the interesting aspect was that agreement was triggered because a claim for a ransomware event was declined. So they went to court for 6 weeks, and at the end they agreed to part the way. As they say, the legal term is no prejudice, means no compensation, no agreement. And it's surprising in that particular aspect, because the foundation for that agreement was that the policyholder misled the insurer in the sufficiency of MFA. It's not that they didn't understand MFA. It's not that they didn't have MFA. They didn't have anywhere near the coverage they promised in policy. So therefore, the interpretation of that is you probably need to really quantify the risk and justify your investment to making sure your disclosure, in this case on your policy form, is proportionate and reasonable. And often I joke about that. We also said read the fine print in a contract. In this case, read the fine print in your response to the contract. Otherwise, you shoot yourself in the foot unexpectedly. And when we say the contract does not where the paper is printed on, this is literally what has happened.
Well, and I have traditionally advised businesses that when you're answering these questionnaires, whether it be cybersecurity insurance or something else, like a vendor risk questionnaire, that you answer in your favor, but it has to be defensible. And in this particular case, saying you have MFA, and I don't know what the percentage was, but let's just say that, okay, you have MFA in place, but you don't have it in place with all of your critical systems. That's not really MFA in place. The spirit of the question is, do you have multi-factor authentication protecting your confidential assets? And and you can't really twist the words around to make it to be what you want it to be. You're right. You got to read the fine print on how you respond. So, um, so a lot of stress involved with regards to cybersecurity, and I know I feel even more right now because I should tell everybody it's like we're recording this. You're of course in Australia, so it's early in the morning there on a Saturday. It's late in the afternoon with me here in Tennessee on a Friday. I'm getting ready to start the weekend. You've already started it, so it's like I'm ready to get out. But it's been a stressful week for me, and I'm going to focus on some of the things that I like to do as far as de-stressing, which actually I'm going to go to a gym right after this and work out some stress. What's one or a couple of things that you do to help get away from the stress of everything cyber related?
Well, I think my result is somewhat interesting and unorthodox. That I will probably just put to you, Greg, that don't create more stress than needed in your home situation. And I learned from my wife and being married for a long time and heavily domesticated. My wife explained to me that happy wife, happy life. Don't create more stress than necessary. Jokes aside, we are pretty happy, and the kids are grown and move house, so we have more time to ourselves. So, in terms of physical activity, perhaps that's really how you ask the question, not a philosophical question of happy way happy life. Is we do enjoy bushwalking, and we're fortunate in Australia. There are a lot of excellent facilities, particularly in Sydney. We have access to water, we have access to the mountain, not very tall, not in the sort of Grand Canyon type sense, but really good weather. And I think most people perception is Australia are colonized by koalas and kangaroos and poison insects and snake. All those existed, and some of them quite cute. But go out to great outdoor, enjoy.
Well, I'm going to admit something that I've never admitted on the pod. I don't think I've admitted this actually to anybody in public, and I'm going to have to say it, but then say a quick story behind it. I have a koala bear, stuffed
Oh,
bear, on my nightstand, and
really?
so
Okay.
and people are asking probably, well, why do you have a koala bear? I actually took this bear with me, if I remember correctly, when I was over in Desert Storm.
All right.
So it's like almost like the teddy bear type thing. But my mom, when I was 4 years old, we grew up very, I wouldn't say poor, but we didn't have money. And the birthday present that she gave to me when I was 4 was a secondhand used koala bear. That's somewhere along the line before college I lost. And then a few years later, she bought me another one. And ever since then, it's like, it's sort of my constant companion. So now I say all that because I've never been to Australia. I've never seen a real koala bear. So I need
All
to
right.
rectify that at some point
You
in time.
absolutely need to. Yeah, absolutely need to. Yeah.
So that might be a future plan of mine. What's a future plan of yours that you'd like to share?
Well, I have just had my first grandchild earlier this year, so we like.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I'm looking forward to spend more time, and that's the very first one. Three sons, so they are all married, and so looking forward to be engaging with our extended family.
Oh, that's perfect. Well, Denny, it has been an absolute pleasure talking with you. I wish we could talk more. I certainly want to continue to talk about some fair stuff because I have not been as engaged in that as I was beforehand. And I probably need to get re-engaged a little bit more, but I think it's fascinating. I think that there's so much potential there, and I so much appreciate your time joining us today.
Thank you. Can I make one last plug?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
As you mentioned, I have a privilege to lead and chair the FairCam work group. So there are a couple of very important use cases, and I will be presenting one of those, which patch prioritization in October in FairCon in DC. So I want to invite your audience to come and join our community and share our insights.
And when is FairCon?
In National Harbor at the DC National Harbor Hotel.
And what date? I'm sorry.
I think 16th to 17th October.
Okay. Well, I might try to make it this year. I've never been to one of those either. I need to do it. So, well, thank you. Good plug. I'll try to remember to put a link to the to FairCon in the show notes, and maybe we'll get a chance to hook up there.
Yeah, I look forward to seeing you in person.
Okay. Well, everybody, stay secure.